Welcome to another episode of Cadence Fishing TV. I'm fishing in Evesham town centre today on the Warwickshire Avon, and this is a little private stretch that's opposite the pleasure garden section. We've not been fishing long, but we've already had a lovely bream and some nice roach. So considering the conditions, we're really pleased. The method that we're employing today is Waggler, and I've started off by fishing with bread punch. The level of the river's a good height. We've had probably a month now of flood conditions with the river hardly dropping down, and it's the first time I've been able to fish the float on the Avon for some time. There's a little bit of a tinge of colour in the water, and with that bit of pace, it's absolutely perfect for this method. It's also been really cold, and my thinking to start with today was just to start off on bread punch, and I've just started by firing a few small balls of punch crumb and fishing a large punch on the hook. And it's been an instant method, as bread punch often is. So I'm going to try and milk this for as long as I can, and then perhaps switch to the maggot and see if we can catch on that with time as well. But we're really pleased with the start today, given the conditions. The river here is, even though it's quite wide, it's only about 4 to 5 foot deep. And I've decided to start on a Waggler because it means I can really search the swim. And I've decided to fish past the pole line today. I know it's quite shallow close here, and I want to get out to where the river just deepens that little bit. So I guess I'm fishing around 16 to 18 metres out. My initial feed was just 2 balls of punch crumb, and I'm fishing with a large bread punch on a size 14 hook. And as is often the case with bread punch, the response is instant, and I caught a really nice bream, probably third cast, which was a bit of a pleasant surprise really, given the conditions. And now I'm catching some nice stamp roach between 3 and 6 ounces. So I'm just going to take it very easy to start with, just top up with the odd ball of punch crumb and just see how the day progresses. I think with time I might start loose feeding some maggots and just try and catch on the maggot as well, perhaps when the punch fades, but at the moment the fish are responding well to the punch. Well, I decided to start on punch because we've had a really cold spell. It's been a harsh winter, and bread's a method that really works well when you're fishing on rivers this time of year, particularly when you're fishing in a town like this. Perhaps it's to do with the fact that a lot of people feed the ducks and the swans with bread. The fish must be conditioned to eating it, and it is often a great way to start the session. So the balls of punch crumb I'm feeding around about the size of a conker, and I've used just pure white crumb and I've mixed it quite wet so it forms a bit of a sticky ball, one that is going to enable me to fire it out. It's going to get out there in one piece and then hopefully get to the bottom and break up quite quickly. And I'm being careful not to feed too much because I don't want to overfeed the fish. I've gone for punch crumb over liquidized bread because I don't want the feed content to be too high. The conditions have been so cold, I just want to try and catch what I can and attract the fish rather than feed them too much. I have got some liquidized bread and I might start to introduce that if the session progresses well and we're catching lots of fish. Since we started the session, there's been quite a strong downstream wind blow up, and I think I'm going to have to change the way I'm feeding and fishing the swim. I'm going to start introducing my loose feed and my bread a bit further down the swim to give me a better angle to control the float. At the moment it's proving quite difficult to present the bait correctly with a waggler where I'm feeding. So I'm going to adjust that position. This is the peacock insert waggler that's worked so well today. As I mentioned, it's got a plastic hollow tip that really is so visible when you're fishing on rivers and anywhere where you've got bad light. And because I've been fishing with some finesse today and typically off the bottom or just tripping the bottom, the insert wagglers work really well. On other situations, perhaps on bigger, deeper rivers, it's worth carrying a good selection of straight peacock wagglers, which are much thicker in diameter. And you can see some of these are quite battered and old. They've definitely seen some action, but I just simply wouldn't be without them. I'll carry them in capacities up to 6 AA, and they're great when you've got a fish with more lead down the line, so more shots down the line. Obviously, if you've got more shot down the line, you need more bulk and capacity to get it out there where you're fishing, and also when you're fishing in deeper water. Another key thing about straight peacock wagglers is when you want to drag line on the bottom and slow the bait down. That can be a great method on swims where you can do it. I know from experience that this is quite snaggy, and I have been catching snags all day, so I don't think that would be a method that would work here, but it's a great method on many rivers throughout the country. And finally, I do like to carry some smaller, obviously lighter capacity wagglers for fishing when I'm fishing up in the water, either fishing for smaller fish like roach and dace, or even chub when they're feeding off the bottom. That's pretty much more in the summer months, really. Well, I just had a bit of a quiet spell where I think probably I had to change the position of feeding and how I was fishing the waggler due to the wind. But this is another nice fish, and I think it's a skimmer or a hybrid. So I haven't loose fed anything yet. I'm just still firing the odd ball of punch crumb out. But that's a lovely fish, and fairly sure that's a roach bream hybrid as well. It's got to be about 8 to 10 ounces. Beautiful. So I'm going to persevere fishing the bread and just see what happens before I start loose feeding anything else. It's just starting to fade now, so I'm probably just going to give it a couple more casts with the bread punch. That was a bite right down my peg, and then I'm going to start loose feeding, and I'm going to loose feed some hemp and very lightly with maggots, just to feel my way in and see how the peg responds. Well, I finally made the switch to maggot because the bread punch had pretty much died a death, and it's taken me a while to get them going, but I'm catching some nice roach on maggot. And what I decided to do was feed the maggots on a closer line than where I was fishing the bread, simply because this downstream wind has got worse and I was really finding it difficult to present the bait correctly fishing further out. So now I'm fishing around about 13 meters out, and the great advantage of fishing a waggler today is it's enabling me to search the peg, so I don't have to just fish on one line. I can fish past the feed, closer than the feed, and right down the peg, and I'm picking up fish at the moment in different areas of the swim. And one thing I've done with my switch to the maggot is I've actually switched to a different rod and a different rig. And I'm using a 3AA Waggler now as opposed to the 4AA Waggler I was using on the bread. And I'm using a rig with a bit more finesse in terms of the shotting pattern, which I'll show you in a bit. When you're fishing on the river like this in the winter, you've really got to trick the fish. So everything's got to be perfect. The presentation of the float's got to be perfect. And I like to fish as fine as I dare, especially when I'm roach fishing. So I'll scale down to a 0.8mm hook length, which is around about 1.5 pounds. And I've gone down to a size 20 hook. That's why I'm just having to take my time a bit more with the fish. I'm also using our softest rod, which is the 13-foot number 1. And it's an absolute dream of a rod when you're fishing finer like this. It means I can play the fish with more confidence due to the fact it's got such a lovely soft tip and progressive action. So I just like to take my time and make sure I get every fish, because it's days like this in a match particularly where an odd fish here or there can make the difference. So there we go. That's a beautiful roach. Got to be 6 to 8 ounces. And these bigger roach on the Avon can be really tricky characters to catch, and I recommend that you do try fishing a bit finer, particularly on a cold winter's day like this. So I keep mentioning the downstream wind, and I've decided to feed further down where I'm feeding my maggots so I can really get behind the float. You can see now I've got a much shallower angle so I can get my line right behind the float and present it properly. It's things like that that really do make a difference on a tough day. Being able to get the float to trot correctly. I think the other reason that I fished a Waggler today was fishing a top and bottom float like a stick float or a bollo would have been very, very difficult in this wind. The fact that it's quite a shallow peg also makes it difficult to do that with a top and bottom float. So it's days like this when I think the Waggler becomes an absolutely unbeatable method. Hook bait, I just tried a double fluoro pinky, which really can be a fantastic bait. I'm not feeding any pinkies, obviously I'm just feeding very lightly with maggots, perhaps 8 to 10 maggots every cast, and every so often I'm feeding a pouch full of hemp. But I find it's a great tip to try double fluoro pinky when I'm river fishing. Seems to pick out bonus fish and get you bites when you can't get a bite on a normal maggot. Well, that feels like another nice roach. You might notice when I'm striking, I'm having to do quite a sweeping strike just to pick up the loose line between the rod and the float, just caused by the difficult wind. And that's another great advantage of using a softer rod. It means I can strike with some force without the fear of cracking off or pulling out on this fine gear that we're using. I think that's a little chub. Yeah, I was wondering if a chub might turn up. There's not a big one, but always welcome on a tough day. I absolutely love waggler fishing like this, even in hard conditions. It's so rewarding. And Chappie the cameraman now, he wants me to stop and do some tackle talk, so I better obey what he says. So I already mentioned the rods I'm using today. I'm using two 13-foot CS10s, and on the Maggot I'm using the number 1, which is the softer rod in the 13-foot range. We do a number 1, number 2 and a number 3, which are getting progressively more powerful. Both the rods are matched with a CS8 4000 reel. I'm using my trusty 017 Pro Gold line, which is a great line for float fishing. Float wise, I've used 2 of these Dave Harrell insert peacock wagglers, and on the Maggot I'm using a 3AA. And then I've got to say, I really do love these floats. I think a great fact about them is the fact that they've got this plastic insert, which, as you can see, really glows in the sun. A lot of the time when you're fishing on rivers, the light can be really difficult, and I really like using these insert wagglers. On another day I might use a straight waggler as well, so I'll perhaps show you some of those in a minute, but that's working well today. So obviously I've got the bulk of the shot around the float. That's 3 AAs there, and I've got just a number 10 either side to stop the main shot from slipping. And then down the line, because I'm fishing the Maggot and I want to get a really nice presentation, I've got 4 number 10s, and I've spread them out in the bottom half of the rig. So I've actually got 4 number 10s there that are spread out. Then I've got a nice decent length, hook length of, I don't know, it's got to be around about a foot and a bit. And the hook length material is 08mm, and it's actually fluorocarbon. This is an old Super Team fluorocarbon, which I still use. And I find that on a hard day, fluorocarbon definitely can get you some more bites. I really like it. So that's the Maggot rig. So the rod I used on the bread at the start was the 13-foot number 2 CS10. And because I was fishing the bread in quite a positive way, I wasn't feeding a lot of bread, but I was fishing a good sized punch. I was using a double punch of it was a 6mm Drennan double punch, and I used a 4AA version of that Dave Harrell insert, and I used that just to give me a bit more weight to help me cast the bread without potentially, you know, the bread flying off, so I could lob the float out, and also it meant I could control it very nicely, particularly in that downstream wind. And I didn't shot that with number 10s, I shotted it with number 8s, and the best rig was to bulk 3 number 8s around about, I don't know, a third up from the hook, and had 2 number 10s as droppers, and that was working best today and enabling me to get some really good positive bites. On the punch I was using this Colmic, it's an N957, it's a size 14 hook. Again, I was being positive with the bread. If I wanted to fish a smaller punch, I'd have obviously scaled down to probably an 18. And in the end on the Maggot I've settled on a size 20 B560. I tried a few different hooks, a B510, a barbless hook, and a fine match, and I bumped a few fish, so the B560 seems about right today for the Maggot in this flow. I mentioned I'm using a double punch, and sometimes I like to do that when I want to create a more compact bread pellet. So it means I've got a good size bait, but I don't know if you can see it, but that bread is actually quite compacted, and obviously casting bread punch on a waggler can be difficult if it keeps flying off, so I do quite like to do that. And obviously as the bread's going down the river it will swell up anyway, and you can get 2 or 3 casts out of each go with the double punch like that. On the Maggot, best bait's been single red maggot or double pinky, and a good tip when you're fishing in the winter is to actually use older bait. Don't like to use really fresh bait, because I want maggots that are a bit older they're a bit tougher and they've shrunk a little bit, so they'll actually sink better as well in the faster water. Obviously when I'm fishing a single maggot like that, I like to hook it in the conventional way through the fat end. When I'm fishing double pinky, I'll hook them both through the tail, which I think helps prevent spin ups, but also more importantly in my mind, it gives more hook to aid penetration, so you bump less fish. Quite often if you have the hook, or the pinkies rather, hooked in the conventional way, you'll find that one of them will double over the point, and you can bump quite a few fish. That's another nice roach on double fluoro pinky. Probably doesn't look it with this sunshine, but it's a really cold day. It was -1 when we got here, and I don't think it's got much above freezing all day. What a beautiful roach. Well, there we go, that's a better rubber dub chub. Not a monster, but it's got to be knocking on for £1. It just shows with using balanced tackle you can land a bonus fish like that chub, as well as tempt those smaller tricky roach. So I don't know if you can see, but the sun's going behind the bridge now and we're in the shade and we're really starting to feel the cold, so I think we're going to make that the last fish. Well, the temperature's definitely dropping and I'm really feeling the cold. But what a fantastic catch. 12 to 15 pound of fish. I think it's exceptional given the conditions we've been faced with today. I think it was a good decision to start on the bread punch, obviously catching that nice bream, which has got to be over £4. Some good hybrids and roach. And then by switching to the maggot, we kept the fish coming, catching some nice roach, some more hybrids and those bonus chub at the end. I hope the tips we've shown you today help and encourage you to go out and give a go on the Waggler yourself. I'm going to get to the pub now with Monty and we're going to warm up. Thanks for watching.